On this edition of NTD's International Reporters Roundtable, heroes. Who are they? In the past, they seemed easier to find. They were in Hollywood movies or people who changed the course of history simply by standing up for what is right. Some were reluctant heroes, unexpected heroes, and some wouldn't see themselves as heroes at all, but their humble self-sacrifice was admired by those around them. Our guests Sam Sorbo, Ted Lippian, and Xi Van Fleet join us to discuss the qualities of heroism and where to find our heroes today. Welcome to NTD's International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Cindy Drucare. In the early years of Hollywood, there was a standard. Movies filled with wholesome families, people of good character who would step up in difficult times and become a hero, someone audiences could root for and wanted to emulate. We loved to celebrate our heroes, soldiers, astronauts, Olympic champions. We'd even throw parades for them. We looked up to religious leaders, scientists, doctors, artists, builders, and civil rights leaders. And we honored mom and dad, teachers, firefighters, police, common people who sometimes change the course of history. What about today? Who are propped up as the heroes today? Hollywood gangsters, drug-addicted pop stars, radical internet influencers, opportunist politicians. Surely, we can do better than that. Today, we restore the hero. Time to meet our panel. We have with us Sam Sorbo, a successful Hollywood actress, writer, and producer. Sam stepped back from that career to immerse herself in homeschooling her 3 children, and now she's a dedicated education freedom activist and an author and a show host. And along with her husband, Kevin Sorbo, who you may know, he played Hercules, the famous hero, they produce different kinds of films now, ones that highlight the goodness in human nature. And Ted Lippian, an international media executive and press freedom advocate. Ted began as a radio announcer for Voice of America and eventually became chief of their Polish service and was also the president of Radio Free Europe. After retiring, he founded the NGO Free Media Online and co-founded the Committee for U.S. International Broadcasting, a nonprofit focused on media censorship. Finally, Xi Van Fleet. In 2021, she spoke up at a school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia, against critical race theory. Her speech went viral, launching her public career, and now she is an author and a speaker and someone who devotes herself to warning people about the parallels that she sees between what she experienced in Mao's Cultural Revolution China and what is unfolding in America today. Thank you all so much for joining us for a very important topic, heroes. And I want to start by getting a sense from each of you about what you see as the qualities of heroism. So I want you to do that by telling us about one hero that you really admire and what we can learn from their story. We'll have time to get into lots more, hero stories as the show goes on, but let's start with that. Sam, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, it's the quintessential story. It's the story that beats all other stories. The man who sacrifices himself for his friend, and that's really the ultimate identification for a hero, is somebody who is willing to self-sacrifice for another person.
Is there someone you have in mind when you think about that?
Well, of course, it would be Jesus Christ. It's the people in uniform who emulate the values that Christ gave us, and then it's from then on down. So fathers who sacrifice for their families, they go to work every day to bring home a livelihood that will care for their families, and that's a sacrifice. And the mothers who sacrifice for their children so that their children will have a good life, and on down the line.
Okay, so those are really, everyday heroes that we can see all around us. And I feel like there's kind of 2 levels of heroes, those that, get propped up and those that we can see in our everyday lives. Ted, what about you? What are the qualities of heroism and who do you think of when you think of a hero?
Well, I'm thinking about Pope John Paul II and his message, be not afraid, while at the same time having great respect for human rights and human life. So to me, he's the hero who achieved a major revolution, the defeat of communism in Poland and in the rest of Eastern Europe, through peaceful means, through peaceful resistance, by encouraging people to resist communism without spilling blood. That's an achievement that very few people could claim.
I have to ask you, because I know you interviewed him before he was Pope, a couple of years before he was Pope. Did you see in him at that time the qualities of heroism that we all saw come out later?
Yeah, he was an extremely charismatic person and a very kind, and he made a great impression on me. And he spoke about hunger of today's man, and it was the hunger for love, it was the hunger for truth, and it was hunger for understanding. And that was also part of his message to the people of Poland and to the people everywhere once he was elected Pope 2 years later, which was in October 1978.
Remarkable. And Xi, how about you? When you think of heroism, who do you think of? And what qualities do they possess?
Yeah, I don't have a single person, because to me, the American people, the people are my heroes. And the founding fathers who founded this great country, and those who fight to keep our freedom free for all of us, and for especially those who are fighting to save our country today. Those everyday people, those parents that I met in my fight and across the nation, I met so many of them. They are just average people. They are my heroes.
Right. I mentioned earlier that there were, two levels of hero. Is there anyone, we'll talk later about maybe some false heroes, but I wonder, is there anyone in particular, maybe in American history, now past or present, that you think embodies those characteristics?
And it's someone you can see in behind me. I painted that painting, George Washington, and he's my ultimate hero.
Wonderful. When did you become American?
It's 1994. I'm sorry, 1992. I came here in 1986.
Wow.
Okay. Can I just add into that, because it's true. She's picked a very good exemplar of a hero, especially from United States history, in the form of George Washington, who was a man who didn't seek the presidency. He then was drafted into the presidency by and large, and largely unwilling, but he realized that his nation called him to a duty. And so he sacrificed. All he really wanted to do was go to his farm in Virginia and tend to the farm. And he loved it. But he was prevented from doing that because he served as president of the United States. And when he turned over the reins of the presidency, King George said, "There can't be a finer man on earth," something to that effect, because he couldn't believe that somebody would willingly relinquish power in that way. And then, of course, George Washington went to his farm and promptly became ill and then died, sadly. But he's definitely, I would say, our first American hero, certainly because it was at the formation of the nation.
Ted, what do you think the relationship is between heroism and power? Because it seems like we will hold up the powerful as heroes, but a lot of the heroes we're talking about are people who did not seek it or want it.
Yes, well, there's real power and there's spiritual power or moral power. And if you think about Pope John Paul II, he achieved his victory over communism with spiritual and moral power. That was the form of resistance that he chose. His models, his heroes were two people, as far as I can tell. One was Mahatma Gandhi, who was the independence leader of India, in India. And the other was, surprisingly, but very few people know this, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who led the civil rights movement in the United States. Karol Wojtyła, which was his name before he became Pope, studied both, the writings of both Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. He called Gandhi a hero to humanity. It's interesting that he should use that phrase, a hero to humanity, when he visited India as Pope in 1986. And he said that Gandhi preached the need for mutual understanding, for acceptance and collaboration between religions in the pluralistic society of modern India and throughout the world. So yeah, there's a difference between physical power, actual power, and spiritual power, moral power, and I think he proved that you can use spiritual power and moral power to achieve victory over political figures and political ideologies and be victorious. At least in his own country and throughout the region where Poland is located. It may not always be possible in other countries. He visited Cuba in 1998, and his visit did not have the same effect that his visit in Poland and first visit in 1979 had, and it led to the formation of Solidarity a year later, the independent trade union and human rights movement, and 10 years later, communism in Poland was gone after partially free elections in 1998. So that's the difference between spiritual power and political power, and the Pope proved that you could use spiritual power, not resort to violence, and achieved great things.
Yes, he was absolutely seminal in bringing down communism in Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in China. When we come back, we're going to take a little break now. When we come back, we're going to talk about perhaps some false heroes that the state props up. And then I'd like to get into why heroism is so important for children when we get back. Welcome back to NTD's International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker, and we'll get right back to our panel with Sam Sorbo, Ted Lippian, and Xi Van Fleet. So, Xi, I'm going to go to you because I was saying just before the break that sometimes there are false heroes, which communists are very good at propping up. And I want to talk about that in the context of its impact on children, because there are people who are held up as role models. And then Sam, maybe think about, you're in the education space and why it's so important to have heroes for children. What is it that we need to teach them, want to teach them? So Xi, maybe explain to me your experience growing up with the Cultural Revolution.
Yes, I grew up in South China, and I really grew up in a culture that hero worship. And we have a long list of heroes for us to emulate. And we have heroes specifically for children, and heroes for workers, factory workers, for peasants, for soldiers, and for the whole entire country. And I remember one of the heroes we're supposed to worship was a 14-year-old martyr. And she was executed because she worked for the communists and by the nationalists during the Civil War, 14-year-old girl. And so why they want us to regard her as our example? Because she sacrificed her life for the cause of revolution, for the cause of communism. And we were all expected to do the same thing. Her name is Liu Hunan. And so that's how how I and with millions of other children grew up with. We absolutely have a lot of heroes. And so that's only just one example. And then there's another example. And actually the CCP launched a campaign for the entire country to learn from the hero. His name is Lei Feng, and he was PLA soldier and a truck driver, and he died in an accident when he was 22. So you notice every hero was a martyr. They all died. There's no living heroes for us to worship. So he was the example for the entire country to follow. What was his character? He was loyal to the party, and he was selfless, and he hated the enemy with boundless hatred, and he loved the party with boundless love. So that's our hero. So we should all become Lei Feng. And what I want to remind people is those heroes were abandoned after the Cultural Revolution, and nobody paid attention to them anymore. But Xi Jinping revived them all, brought them all back. Now the young children are taught to worship all those heroes.
So, Sam, what do you think the impact of that is on children? Like the ultimate, hero is someone who will die for their country. What do you think is important to teach children in terms of the people they should look up to?
Well, honestly, it's the same thing that Islamists, that fervent Islamists teach their children. The jihadi is the ultimate goal. I want to go back to your question about power, because I think in our culture today we conflate power with heroism to a certain degree. And so because heroes typically have and wield power, even Gandhi had a definite power to what he was able to accomplish, and he was heroic. And so then we conflate the two. And so because we aren't learning discernment in our nation right now, because we aren't being educated at all in our schools, we conflate the two things. And so anybody who has power seems to be heroic. There's also the wealth contribution to this equation. And because we are taught to worship money in the United States in our schools, and we're taught that, your value is purely based on how much money you can earn, even though as adults we learn that that's really not the truth. But I don't think we ever really most often we don't really come to terms with that. And so we still think, well, moneyed people are powerful people, and therefore they must be heroic somehow. And of course, that's not the case. So when you take that whole sort of paradigm and you inflict it on children, it's nothing but confusing. And you have children whose motives and whose ideals are warped by this strange ideology that has no resemblance to the truth. So yeah, over in China, they have false heroes. We have false heroes here in the United States. I don't think people necessarily know this per se. Hercules was the #1 show in the world for several years. It was, of course, syndicated nationally, but it was in over 177 countries worldwide. And the reason that it resonated with people was because Hercules was actually a good guy. And the character of Hercules on that show never killed anybody. All the violence on the show was actually fairly cartoonish. So the guy who's thrown through the building left a big, outline like a gingerbread man in the side of the building. And so there was a lot of humor in the show, which allowed the heroism of the character who never wanted to fight anybody, but agreed to fight them and then beat them fair and square and never really hurt them. That's a hero that Hollywood used to make. Now what they're doing is they're taking the anti-hero and elevating him to hero status. And I think that ultimately that's terribly dangerous because it incites people to misbehavior.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was saying in the intro, we've got, gangsters are the heroes of Hollywood films these days instead of, people like Hercules or who we would see in the 50s as the heroes. So you're making different kinds of films now. Your husband is in an excellent film that's about to come out, part of Fox Studios, and that hero is someone who is a very unlikely hero, and he also had a great influence. His influence reverberated. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think you're referring to The Firing Squad, which is based on a real live guy who was imprisoned because he accidentally, I believe it was accidental, it might have been purposefully, killed somebody. So he was a murderer, he was convicted, and then he served on death row for long enough for him to discover the Bible, read the Bible, accept the Bible, the gospel, and then start sharing the gospel with other inmates in prison, and brought many other souls to Christ, and eventually was killed. So what I love about that story and the stories that we tell at Sorbo Studios is when you take a real live person who does something heroic, they might not be heroic for all their life because nobody is sinless, right? We all make mistakes and we all do bad things. This guy did an incredibly bad thing, right? But he redeemed himself because he became an exemplary person in the long run. And yeah, it took him a long time to get there. But what that does is it offers sort of the olive branch of hope to the audience, where the audience can say, okay, that's a real guy. The problem that we have with Hollywood is they put out, Deadpool or even Spider-Man. Like, sure, they're great. They might be great characters. They might be good people as characters, but they're doing things that are so extraordinary that no human could ever measure up to that. So that doesn't really offer the audience hope. And that's my goal, is for audiences to leave our films going, I can be a better person because I saw somebody who became a better person.
Yeah, so important. And I really think the stories of true heroes is a lot more powerful, than the fictitious ones for exactly those reasons, because if people can see themselves in it. Ted, I know you've worked with some people who absolutely did heroic things, and specifically, tell us about one of your colleagues from Poland.
Well, her name was Zofia Korbońska. During World War II, she was in the anti-Nazi underground resistance movement, and her job was to gather information about what was happening in Poland under Nazi occupation, code that information, and send it by shortwave radio to Britain so it could be shared with the rest of the world. She was reporting on things such as the extermination of the Jews, medical experiments in Nazi concentration camps, and that information would be sent back to Poland by radio, usually the same day. So many people who were listening to foreign broadcasts from Britain at that time thought that the radio station was actually in Poland because the news was so fresh. However, this activity was extremely dangerous because the Germans were constantly looking for the radio transmitters that she was using, and about half of the people that she worked with were caught and executed by the Gestapo. Now, after the war in 1947, she and her husband, who was also in the resistance movement, and who in 1980 received the Vad Yashem Righteous Among the Nations medal for saving Jews during World War II. They escaped to the West, and eventually she started working for the Voice of America in 1948. And I got to know her when I joined the Polish service in 1980. And she became my mentor, and we worked together for many years.
That's an amazing story. I've got to cut you off because we're up against a break. So we will be right back with our panel discussing heroes. Welcome back to NTD's International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker, and we're back with our panel to discuss finding heroes in our everyday world. I want to ask you, you actually became one of these unwitting heroes. Probably you don't see yourself that way, but I think other people do. You just spoke up at a school board meeting. I wanted to ask you what that process has been like for you, and has that taught you something different about heroes or America?
Yeah, first of all, I want to add, I do have a hero in China because I just mentioned my hero here in America is George Washington. But I think a lot of Americans and people around the world still remember that Tank Man during the Tiananmen Square massacre. We don't have a name. We don't know what happened to. We just don't know anything about him. And he single-handedly tried to stop a string of tanks and of the Chinese Liberation Army, who just killed thousands of people the night before. And he was there trying to stop it, and knowing that he could easily run over. And that is really someone that takes so much courage to do that. And power, he has no power. He does not, I don't think he had any idea what he become, what kind of symbol he became. And he just want to stop the massacre, and because he support the students who just fighting for democracy. And as for me, and it was such a surprise that my video went viral. And to me, and I don't know, a lot of people say I'm brave. But to me, it's not bravery. The reason I went there is because I understand. I understand that America is now in danger. And I see the repeat of what I experienced in China. And I thought I escaped communism. I thought that something is forever behind me. And so I want to go there to warn Americans because I don't want to live under communism again. So it's very selfish. I have a very selfish motivation. I want to go there to warn everybody. I lived under communism. I tell you, you do not want to experience what I lived through. So in a way, that's how the reason I went there. So it's nothing heroic. I just want people to understand that we are fighting for the survival of our republic. And we are fighting for ourselves, every one of us fighting for ourselves. Do you need courage? Do you need to be a hero when you're fighting for your own survival? I don't think so. So that's how I look at it.
Ted, actually, so just as she was speaking, I was, you're been in the media business for a very long time, and a lot of the times it's up to media to suddenly create these heroes. If that video hadn't gone viral, people hadn't invited Xi on, if that Tank Man moment wasn't captured, he wouldn't be a hero. Why? Explain how you see the role of media in terms of propping up heroes or finding heroes or picking heroes even.
Well, I think journalists themselves have to be heroes because, as we see more and more often, they often self-censor themselves or are afraid to speak up and to be in disagreement with the current ideology that seems to be fashionable among their colleagues. And I've seen that happening in various news organizations, including the current Voice of America, where some journalists are afraid to speak up and challenge the prevailing ideology of the cancel culture and presenting everything in black and white. You are either a progressive or a fascist. That's certainly not the case. So we do need more courage among journalists to be more critical, to be more skeptical in reporting news, and that can have and to, of course, to be objective and to seek the truth, regardless of what it may be. I think that's a very important role, and great courage is needed in that profession in the media to bring out the truth and not be intimidated, not to succumb to the cancel culture, and not try to go with the with the fashionable ideology, which I think increasingly these seems to be Marxism, if not communism, or and as she said, it presents a great danger to the United States and to the tradition of democracy, tolerance, and dialogue. And dialogue is something that John Paul II always valued and encouraged. He maintained a dialogue even with the communists, but without compromising his principles and values, Christian values. That was absolutely not something that he would ever do. But he treated everyone with respect, and that's what journalists need to do. They need to have respect for everyone they report on and for people they may disagree with.
Sam, Sorbo Studios is producing very different kinds of films from, your typical Hollywood film. I'm wondering, how do those heroes differ, and what's the audience reception to them, and what do you,
So, like we said, the films that we try to do tend to be true stories of ordinary people behaving extraordinarily, and typically that embodies the journey of the hero. And you mentioned before that oftentimes heroes don't want to be heroes, and that's of course the character of the reluctant hero, which is much more interesting than somebody who's seeking accolades from others and just wants to do something to prove themselves. It's much more interesting to watch somebody battle even themselves to become the hero that they have within them. And it's much more inspiring. And so that's what we do. The audiences that come see our movies are blown away. They love this kind of entertainment. And frankly, this is the entertainment that made Hollywood what it was once a long time ago. Unfortunately, the nefarious forces of Marxism and communism, and I don't really differentiate between the two because it's all the same ideology. It's an ideology of slavery, has basically taken over Hollywood to a very large degree. And, we can talk about why that might be. But unfortunately now, Hollywood has understood that it has great power, great influence. And so it's trying to influence the rest of the world, the United States and abroad, with its messages. And of course, NTD did this wonderful documentary called Hollywood Takeover that I participated in, where they talked about how Hollywood exerted its power financially to influence the storytelling that was coming out of Hollywood. Did I say Hollywood was? China was trying to influence the storytelling of Hollywood and make the stories that Hollywood was telling in their movies pro-China, pro-communist, and more anti-American. And that film does an exceptional job delving into the mechanics of that sort of takeover. We need to guard ourselves, and the only way to really do that is personally, which of course is the story of America. It's the story of the individual overcoming his or her own sort of shortcomings or challenges to rise above, to be the hero in their own story. The communists don't want you to be the hero. In fact, as she pointed out, their heroes die young, right? They don't want you to be heroic in your own life. They want you to toe the line, to obey. We, as America, we try to encourage people, hey, be the hero for yourself, because then you can better serve others. And isn't that a beautiful thing? And so those are the stories that I want to infuse back into the culture.
Yeah, and as well, China, it's been a specific project of China. So not only are they, influencing the content films, they own AMC theaters, so they even own the screens. And this has been, an actual project. Okay, we're gonna stop for a break now. And when we come back, we'll have our final session with our beautiful panel here and talk about American heroism specifically. Welcome back to NTD's International Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker, and we return now to the conclusion of our panel on Finding the Hero with Sam Sorbo, Ted Lippian, and Xi Van Fleet. And I want to finish off by talking about qualities that are specifically American heroism. Sam was talking a little bit before about being the hero of your own story. We talked about self-sacrifice. So think for a minute about what is it that makes an American hero specifically? Is there something like that? Okay, Xi, you've thought a lot about what it means to be American. What do you think?
Well, I think the number one quality of a hero is truth seeking. You have to be truthful. And also you fight for something you believe in, and you fight for something that, well, really is not about yourself, but to benefit the rest of the nation. And so I think for that, I think nowadays the educational system, the media, and Hollywood are all taken by Marxists. They are in control of all these institutions. So the real heroes in the past were not taught. And so I just did a Google search today, American hero. And I come up with, they showed me 9 people, and most of them, or half of them, I'm not familiar with, and 5 of them are women. And so George Washington was not one of them. So that is how the social media controls everything. And the American children were not taught they are real heroes throughout the history. And that's exactly what happened to me in China, because they control the media, they control the educational system. We have history throughout the history in the Chinese long 3,000 year civilization. We don't know them because they were considered 4-olds to be discarded. And so I think that is the problem today. And the people, young people today, who do they worship? Celebrities. That is what they worship, because they don't know history. And the same thing, if you ask young people today, do you know anything about Tank Man? Do you know anything about the Tiananmen Square massacre? Majority of them say never heard about it. And that's how the CCP control history and control who should be hero, who shouldn't. And that's what's happening today in America.
All right, Sam, jump in. I think you've got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating because we have such extraordinary heroes in this nation. I mean, the men who crafted the founding documents of this nation. And we can talk about Benjamin Franklin, who was self-made. I love that she said they weren't taught. They didn't go to school, folks. They taught themselves because they were that interested, and because children are intrinsically gifted with curiosity, and so they naturally teach themselves. And it's the schools that get in the way of that. So Benjamin Franklin was entirely self-taught. He ran away from his indentured servitude to his brother, and he forged out on his own when he was a very young man. And he apprenticed at a printer's shop, and then he became a printer, and then he became a writer. He taught himself how to write because he knew that he didn't know how to write. He taught himself, and then he became an inventor, and then he became a scientific experimenter. And pretty soon he was the most famous man in the entire world. He would beat Michael Jackson and Elvis hands down for his era. And the reason was because he did his own research and he was truth-seeking, as Xi very rightly pointed out. The only thing that I'll push back on is he was also very self-serving, but not to the point of selfishness, but to the point of generosity. And so you serve yourself as a way of serving others. There's a case to be made for that. So he wasn't completely selfless. He served himself. But at the same time, he shared his knowledge with the world because he wanted people to know, because he wanted the whole world to rise alongside of him. And that's partly how he helped establish the United States of America and the bicameral legislature that we enjoy today. Enjoy might be the wrong word. But anyway, the one that we use today, vaguely. Anyway, so the United States is rife with history, but we don't teach it in our schools. And that's the infiltration of Marxism and communism in our schools, is this lack of teaching history You open any history textbook today, you will notice they aren't teaching history. They're teaching memorization. They're teaching dates, names, and places that are completely disjointed and have no storytelling in them. The best way to learn history, the best way for your children to learn history, read biographies, read good historical stories, understand the stories of the culture, you understand who you are, and that will then compel you to be better than who you are. But if you're getting fed history in little tiny snippets of sound bites and factoids, that will not inspire you. So it's not the fact that the Tiananmen Square guy stood in front of the tank. It's the story that came before it and who he was before that happened. And then you go, oh my gosh, he's my hero. I hope someday that I get the opportunity to stand up to tyranny. But if the communist government doesn't allow that story to be told, and Google won't allow that story to be told either, right? Don't go to Google to get your history or your factoids about heroes. If those stories aren't allowed to be told, then what are we left with? We're left with Hollywood crap media, right? We're left with social media and really bad stories about really awful people doing terrible things that aren't heroic. But if that's all we have, we really have nothing. We have the entire degradation of our culture. And so this is such an important conversation to have. And parents out there, I really encourage you, do not send your children to strangers to be educated.
All right,
allow them to teach themselves.
Let me jump to Ted here. Ted, you came from a communist country outside of America. I wonder what your thoughts are on all of this.
Well, I can think of one American hero who actually came out of Hollywood, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
And you may remember when he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." An American hero to me is someone who's not afraid to tell the truth. He also called the Soviet Union the evil empire. And I remember how frightened and upset some US-born journalists were when they heard him say these words, evil empire. You can't say that. They thought he was going to cause World War III. Well, he did not. And without him, I don't think Pope John Paul II would have been as successful as he was, because Reagan provided the political and even physical support for the Solidarity trade union in Poland that was needed to overcome the communist regime. Another American hero to me is President Truman, who was also not afraid to tell the truth and to say what he thought. And he was the one who helped to create NATO and the Marshall Plan and started the containment of communism at that time. He also reformed the Voice of America, which during World War II and immediately after the war was dominated by communist sympathizers, and not too many people know that. But they were there, and they were supporting the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe until about the late 1940s and the early 1950s. So to me, strong American leaders such as Ronald Reagan and President Truman were the heroes who helped to win the war against communism, at least in my part of the world, that is Eastern Europe, Poland. And of course, it led to the fall of the Soviet Union. But now we have Vladimir Putin, who is trying to resurrect the Soviet Empire and find some support within the United States. Unfortunately, among some conservatives who think quite falsely that Putin is a supporter of religion or conservatism and conservative values, when in fact he is an imperialist who is a great threat to the countries in the region and to the United States. So yes, it's important to tell the truth and to confront evil.
Okay, we
I can
are
recommend
almost at
a really good book.
Go ahead.
It's
Well, actually, I
called
was
The
going to say,
President.
one second, we've got about 40 seconds left for each of you for final thoughts and leave us inspired or anything you want to recommend to the audience. Okay, so Sam, you're first.
Okay, it's a really good book. It's called The President, the Pope, and the Prime Minister, and it tells the story of the downfall of communism by those three people as pivotal elements of that story, and it's a fabulous read. Yes, I want to encourage people, read history, find good storytelling history. It will inspire you. So that's my best advice.
All right, since we just heard from Ted, and Ted, you'll get the final word.
Yeah, I would say this is our job to restore America, to teach real history, to encourage our young people and the public in general to find the heroes. We have so many heroes throughout the history. And also to be a hero today, to fight for our country, to save America.
And Ted, final words of inspiration on heroism?
I think the knowledge of history is extremely important. I agree with Sam and with Xi. And we need to teach real history, not ideological history. And with that knowledge and the power of the knowledge of history, I think we can change America and change the course of this nation.
Excellent. I just want to mention that The Firing Squad that Sam was talking about earlier, that's an FX Studios film, and it's out October 3rd. And I encourage everyone to watch it. It is pretty amazing. If you're talking about heroism, there's a story to inspire. Well, that concludes our discussion today. I really want to thank all of you very much. Sam Sorbo, Ted Lippian, Xi Van Fleet. It was an excellent discussion, and I hope very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, to all of you brave journalists out there honoring our golden rule, seek the truth and report it. Thank you. I'm Cindy Drucker. Thank you for joining us on NTD's International Reporters Roundtable. Until next time.